Inquire all those questions you've always wanted to know. Ask Kati anything.
Hey everybody, welcome back to another episode of Ask Kati Anything. I'm your host, licensed marriage and family therapist, Katie Morton, and today I am so fortunate I get to be joined by Dr. Jalal, who is a neuroscientist at Cambridge University, previously at Harvard University, and considered one of the world's leading experts on sleep paralysis. Thank you, Dr. Jalal, for making time to talk with us.
My pleasure, Katie.
So tell people a little bit about what you do. Since, being a leader in sleep paralysis, I'm like, do you just watch people sleep all the time? Is that what part of your research?
Yeah, good question. Well, no. So what we do is that we study sleep paralysis, which is this very interesting phenomenon. And we've been lucky to sort of study it around the world and see how different people experience it. And so to your viewers, maybe I should explain what sleep paralysis is, because it's quite the experience. Well, it started with my own experience. So let me tell you that. I was a teenager in Copenhagen, and one morning I was lying in my bed sleeping, and I realized, my God, I'm awake. Like, it feels like I'm awake, but I can't move. I can't, do anything. What's happening? Am I paralyzed? Am I going to die? And then I felt like something was on my chest, pressing on my chest, strangling me even. I was terrified at that point. And then I felt like also, this evil, vicious, feeling got just more and more tense with each second. And and then, I felt like a ghost was there, sort of literally, in my room. I thought I was going to die, and the next day I looked into this. I didn't know what to do. Like, do I Google? I saw a ghost. I felt like a ghost was in my bedroom. Like, what's the solution and things like that. But it certainly introduced me to this uncanny phenomenon where you're paralyzed, unable to move, unable to speak. But you feel like you're awake, you can see your surroundings, and occasionally you will feel like there's a, terrifying ghost present, or you might even see a ghost there. So this is what we study, sleep paralysis, and we've been, studying this around the world to see how different cultures understand sleep paralysis.
Oh, that's interesting. Culture. Yeah, because from what I've read, so definitely out of my scope of what I studied in school, but something that a lot of people experience. I've even personally experienced that, where I felt kind of awake. I didn't see the ghost, but I've heard from my viewers that a ton of them have. Yeah. But I had that terrifying feeling of what's wrong. I can't move. Yep. And I, like you, I read about it and learned that your body, in order to protect you from hurting yourself in your sleep, makes you're like paralyzed, so that even though I'm playing soccer in my dream, I'm not kicking around and potentially hurting myself. But it can be really terrifying. And one of the main questions, I guess, I've heard from my audience, but also personally I'm curious, do we find, so I assume, and this might be incorrect, that everybody has sleep paralysis every night, but we don't always wake up to it? Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes sense. So you're right in the sense that each night we cycle through different stages. There's about 4 stages of sleep. And one of these stages is called Rem Sleep. And during Rem Sleep, you have vivid, lifelike, crisp dreams, right? So you see yourself on the moon, having a snack from the fridge. Queen Elizabeth is there too. You're drinking tea with her and everything. So everything is warped, time, places, people, right? And so for you not to act out the dreams and hurt yourself and your sleeping partner, your body paralyzes your entire body. Your brain paralyzes your entire body. So there's a structure in the bottom of the brain, in the brain stem, that releases a certain chemical, and then you're paralyzed. So we go through this each night. But occasionally, in some people, you will wake up during this stage and experience this clash of worlds, meaning you being awake on the one hand and then being paralyzed on the other. So so it's about 1 in 5 people that will have one of these experiences where they actually wake up during REM sleep and have sleep paralysis. But we have this REM paralysis each night. There's actually, Katie, there's actually a group out there with a genetic issue where they will not have this paralysis. So unlike most people, 99% of people, whatever it is, they will actually have what's called Rem Behavior Disorder. So these guys will shout and scream in their dream, while dreaming, and hurt their sleeping partner.
Kind of like I had a girlfriend that did this all the time. It made relationships really hard for her because she'd have to explain like, oh, I scream in my dreams a lot. Yeah. Is that related to night terrors at all? Or is that like a completely separate thing? We just don't become paralyzed.
Yeah. So, there is REM sleep and REM paralysis, right? And this is the REM behavior disorder, that disorder where you sort of shout and scream and you act out these bizarre and vivid dreams, right? But in night terrors and these other sort of parasomnias, they occur during one of the stages of sleep called deep sleep. Now, deep sleep is the stage before REM. And during deep sleep, it's a different stage of sleep. You're engaged in sort of... your brain engages in sort of house chores, so it will clean up your cells. Your immune system is sort of regenerating your hormones. It's a very refreshing stage of sleep. So during that state, if you wake up, you will have things like night terrors, or the kind of dreams where you wake up and you start sleepwalking, or sleep eating disorder. So you might wake up and go to the fridge and eat like frozen foods, and you're sleeping pretty much, but so you might do this. These occur during deep sleep and not during REM per se.
Okay.
Yeah.
Do we know, just out of curiosity, because I specialize in eating disorder treatment, so the night eating, like in our sleep, I've had a couple of patients, probably only 2 or 3 over my years working with people who do that, and they put locks on cabinets and fridges to prevent them from doing that. Yeah. Do we know like what causes someone to do that? Like, is it a chemical difference? Is there a part of our brain that isn't operating? Like, I know you said it's in the brainstem. That's where it releases the hormones or the chemicals to cause us to be paralyzed. Yeah. Do we understand what causes someone to be a sleepwalker? Because I know I don't sleepwalk, but I sleep talk, and not everybody does that. And do we know what causes that?
It's a great question. So these parasomnias, right? So they're a different category than the sleep paralysis type state, right? But so it's not totally clear why you might have these parasomnias, but they're probably related to things like nocturnal arousal, meaning that your brain is more active at night. So I'm guessing things like anxiety, maybe even trauma. And things like that can be a precipitating factor, making your amygdala, the emotional part of the brain, to be more active during night. And so you wake up or you partially wake up. And that's the whole thing. You're not awake, but you're partially awake. So you start walking, or you might, in some cases, like, as you said, I had my little brother. He told me he was maybe I shouldn't tell the story, but anyway, he'll survive. he was playing soccer, so he woke up in the middle of the night and started to play soccer, and so he's now he's a physician now, and don't do these kind of things. At least he doesn't tell me he does, but
doesn't want you sharing his stories,
No, but it's interesting that the whole sleep eating disorder. I mean, it's weird, right? So they wake up and they'll eat like frozen foods, like dog foods, and like they will prepare foods and cut their fingers, and it's weird. Like, how does the brain, like, what's going on? And they will have this proclivity to eat carbohydrates, and it's really bizarre. And the sleepwalking, the type where they will drive. I mean, what's going on there in the brain? Like, how can the brain actually allow you to drive and navigate through like a street, while you're sleeping technically? That's quite the thing.
Yeah, it's really interesting and dangerous, for a lot of people. There's someone I'm sure a lot of people know on TikTok. Her name is Selena, but she has cameras she's placed in her home to record her sleepwalking. But her husband, if he hears her gets up because she's walked out of the house. They live in a really cold climate, and if it's negative 10 degrees out, you can't be walking out in your pajamas. So he really worries about her. And she says it's when she eats certain foods, like if she eats too much cheese or certain carbohydrates, she will wake up. And I wonder, it's interesting.
She eats certain foods, and that leads her to wake up and have these my guess would be that they are somehow disrupting her sleep or allowing her not to sleep as deeply. That's just my guess, could be something along those lines. It has to do really with, to the best of my knowledge, having fragmented sleep or not having having stable and robust sleep, allowing you to sort of smoothly sleep through the night and cycle through these stages in a good robust way. So that's I think what is going on. Well, sleep paralysis though is a bit different. There's it seems like certain genes that regulate your sleep-wake cycle, when these are out of whack, that's, you are more likely to have sort of chronic frequent sleep paralysis. It runs in families, for example. And when you travel, so when I go to like I travel maybe on a lecture tour or something like that, and I go into this like hotel and there's like ceilings are high and it feels like ancient, whatever Scottish, and then I have sleep paralysis. I go, oh my God, this place is haunted, right? It looks like a haunted castle. But in fact, my sleep is probably messed up at that time because I'm traveling. So that can explain why I have potentially sleep paralysis occur at that moment. So
yeah, because I would assume that if we do travel, at least personally, I can speak to this, that like when I do travel, same as you, right? I'm in a hotel and it's like, you don't quite feel safe. So I don't know if I actually go to full sleep.
That's
you know what I mean?
Point.
It's like,
yeah. That's the other
almost
point.
like part of my brain is still awake.
That's exactly right. So I didn't want to overcomplicate it, but exactly. So hypervigilance, so your brain is hypervigilant when you are in these scenarios, and it makes sense, right? So that when we sort of we used to live in a certain cave, and then if you go to another cave, things are more unsure. Predators might come that you're not aware of from certain places, and so you tend to be more terrified and scared, or at least your brain is subconsciously more hypervigilant to threat. And of course, that would lead you not to have as deep sleep, and also just be more conscious, just more aware of anything threatening. Definitely, that's another
Which would make sense. So then we could hypothesize, or maybe it's been proven, because you did mention trauma being kind of attached to some of these parasomnia, sleep paralysis, because, and that now this is like where I can get nerdy, is the amygdala, because that's like in my lane of what I talk with a lot of my patients and viewers about.
Of course.
If that threat center, stress response system is on more high alert, or let's say we already have symptoms of PTSD, so we are more hypervigilant in our waking time, it would make sense that we're also hypervigilant in our sleep time. And I know that a lot of my patients who have a trauma in their background can have nightmares that are flashbacks. It can wake them up. So I would assume it's an easy kind of connection to say that those of us with a history of trauma are more likely to have sleep disturbances as a whole.
Yeah, exactly. So they're more likely to have sleep disturbances as a whole, so have nightmares per se, and then particularly also sleep paralysis. That's exactly what our research shows. So we've done tons of studies on this, and it seems like, when you have PTSD trauma or elevated trauma symptoms, you're more likely to have sleep paralysis. And so that's really interesting, and it shows you that connection, with elevated amygdala activation. But also, what I think is even more intriguing and more interesting is that our research particularly points to the fact that sleep paralysis itself can be so terrifying and so overwhelming that potentially it can be a small trauma in itself, like a small potentially traumatizing experience, and that's interesting. So if you have these small repeated traumas occur, and you can imagine with each time they become more intense, right? Potentially more intense and more intense, you will say, so over time they will escalate and potentially lead to PTSD like symptoms at a clinical level. So that's quite the thing.
And that's really interesting, because we do, more recently, so I wrote a book that came out last year about trauma, and trauma is really not my specialty, or it wasn't like in school and in my trainings. It was definitely more like self-injury, eating disorder focused, but what's the root cause of a lot of those is trauma. So it just kept coming up in my practice and in my time online. And one of my good friends who does EMDR, which I would love to get your take on after this as well, just because of REM sleep and how they say EMDR, what your thoughts are about that. But she talked a lot about big T traumas and little T traumas, and what you're saying about kind of these nightmares or scary sleep scenarios, like a sleep paralysis experience. If you see a ghost and think, like you said, I'm going to die, oh my God, like that's terrifying, right?
Yeah.
We know that to be traumatized, we have to just be scared of our own safety or the safety of someone else. So there you have it, that these little T's build up in the same way one big T could cause PTSD symptoms. These little T's can build up and lead to symptoms of PTSD as well. And I think at least I just wanted to repeat that a little because I know it could be extremely validating for someone out there who feels like it just keeps re-traumatizing them and thinking maybe I'm making it into more than it is. But no, you're terrified. It's scary and you can't move. If it is, the sleep paralysis experience, I can't think of something scarier.
Oh, 100%. So, okay, so let me take you back. So there was actually a study done, and this was my colleague, Rich McNally, who I work with at Harvard, and he did some studies showing that people who have the perception that their sleep paralysis is in fact space alien abduction, right? So they lie and they can't move, they can't speak, and there's these alien creatures that will experiment on them and things like that. When these guys hear audio recordings, of themselves narrating their experience, they will display physiological reactions that are as powerful as somebody with PTSD. So when you compare their sweating, their heart rate, their blood pressure, it is as profound as somebody who has been in actual war. Okay, so just from having sleep paralysis and perceiving that as an alien abduction, you will have war-like, PTSD-like symptoms. So that shows you how powerful it is. And actually, there was an eminent psychiatrist, John Mack, who said that these experiences actually were potentially real, that something was happening that wasn't just the brain. He was playing with that idea. So he was over at Harvard Medical School, and you can imagine the controversy that this led to, because this guy was saying this, and he's a very sincere, very smart guy, and he has a big book and with hundreds of interviews and stuff like that. But it shows you it's a real. It's you're lying and sleeping, but you have all these real, genuinely powerful, things happen in your brain, right? So
and it's almost like our perception of what's going on in our personal experience is all that's relevant, because that's what we're going to react to, 100%, right?
100%. And then our research, what it shows you is, and this is kind of like the punchline of our research, is that when you live in a culture, when you live in a place where there's like cultural ideas about what sleep paralysis is, and when it's really thought as something really terrifying, like a ghost coming at night, it has certain, there's a whole narrative around the ghost. Like it looks like this, it does this, it will potentially kill you. What tends to happen then, people will have longer paralysis or perceived paralysis. They will have greater fear to the extent they will think they will die from it. And also what you'll find that the episodes are much more frequent. So they have it like, I think it's like 3 times more often. So something is happening. It's sort of like a placebo or nocebo effect, which is the placebo's evil twin, right? So that's where you imagine something bad and then you see all these physiological reactions. Your reality is being molded and shaped by your own thoughts and expectations. So I use this example called the Little Lisa example to illustrate what I mean, because it really captures as well. So imagine this girl called Little Lisa, right? She lives with her grandmother somewhere on this fictitious island. And her grandmother says, look, there's this creature, it looks like this. It's called the boogeyman. It will come at night and attack you, choke you, strangle you. Now, Little Lisa will go to bed and have sleep paralysis for the first time. She's never had it before. She will have it for the first time. And she will see the ghost her grandmother was telling her. Exactly that ghost will appear in front of her. And the question is why? What's going on, right? So the thing we think is going on based on our research is that she will start to then, first of all, she will have anxiety. We talked about anxiety will trigger you to wake up during REM and have disrupted REM, right? Disrupted sleep per se, but also REM sleep. So that's the first predisposing factor. Second, she will probably start to monitor any paralysis sensations, really looking for somebody holding her down, choking her, strangling her, just like her grandmother said, right? So she'll start surveying her bodily sensations and anything, holding her, pinning her down. And then when she wakes up, she will start, it's almost like dream mentation, which is this dream imagery will sort of take over, like top down from the sort of more sort of her own imagination of her dreams will sort of color what the hallucinations then will look like and what the scenario her brain will come up with, right? So it will fit the descriptions of her grandmother. She wakes up the next day. She's terrified. In fact, her fear will cause her to have sleep paralysis the following night and 2 nights again, and the third night, you see, so it becomes potentially chronic and it builds up. And then 1 month later, she go, my God, I'm possessed. This is personal. This thing is after me. My soul is being devoured, and she might potentially develop anxiety, potentially PTSD from these small T's building up. And then she goes to the village and tells her friends in school about this monster. So the virus is spreading to them, and they will start having it. So this is what I sort of call the panic hallucination model, but it's really the punchline of my research in these various countries. This strange phenomenon of a mind-body interaction of this sort, right, of this caliber, which I think is quite striking.
Yeah, and I mean, it makes sense if we think about it from a neurological perspective, where we're like, oh, okay, so if my amygdala is triggered because I think there's a threat, and in that story, little Lisa, she's told by her grandmother that there is a threat. So then she's on hyper alert. Like we were talking about being in a hotel and not being able to fully rest because you're like, somebody could get in. This isn't my home. I don't, am I safe? Exactly. So she already feels not safe. Okay. Then, of course, that would happen. You know what I mean? And then you could see how that one thing could lead to another.
One thing could lead to another, exactly.
Yeah, it's really interesting. One of my viewers asked, and I don't know if it does, I don't think there's an answer to this. I think it doesn't matter, but she was wondering if age has anything to do with it. Because as a child, she had a bunch of sleep paralysis experiences, and as an adult, she hasn't. Do we find any correlation with age in this, or? We haven't
seen anything. It does seem to happen in children. We know it happens even in animals and cats and dogs, like the Rem paralysis. We can't, it seems like they might also have sleep paralysis in some of the observations, but no, my guess would be in her case, maybe something like her sleep becoming stabilized with time. Did you talk about that either? Like maybe she had more stable sleep with time, less excitable, maybe like her cortex, the top part of the brain that's maybe matured over time. This is me speculating. But no, I haven't seen actual research correlation per se showing that it becomes less with time. In fact, in theory, the only thing that I can think of is excitability as a young child. That's the only thing I can think of.
Yeah, and that's interesting because my brain automatically went to, well, I would assume either you've been working through maybe some of the traumas or upsets you had as a child, or those upsets as an adult, now you just don't have them anymore because you have more perspective or more experience. So you realize something's not as frightening, or maybe you're now removed from a bad environment. You know what I mean? Because if we had an abusive parent or a volatile parent at the very least, I could understand that we could probably struggle, especially based on even that story of little Lisa. If we don't think that things around us are as scary, no one's told us that story, or the person who was scary to us isn't around anymore. All of those factors could not take away our sleep paralysis, but make I don't know how often it happens, it would go down potentially, right?
Absolutely. So if you have,
again, speculating.
No, it's a good speculation because that's what is definitely a contributing factor. If you are anxious, if you have higher baseline anxiety and higher sort of you're more alert to threat, and you have a threatening environment, yes, definitely, then that would lead you to have more sleep paralysis. That's shown by research that is definitely a correlation there, very strong. If her environment became more safe and she had worked through some of these traumas, then that could definitely be something.
Yeah, and out of curiosity, do we have any idea why we see images, why we see ghosts? Or I've heard from my audience all sorts of things: black blobs in a corner, angels, ghosts, demons.
Yeah, it's a great question.
Yeah.
So that's a great question. So my research roughly is, there's this whole empirical realm of things around the world and looking at people and anxiety and trauma and all that. But another interest of mine is to look at, or think about at least, what's going on in the brain. Why do people actually see this ghost? Because this was from a teenager to now, why would your brain come up with this ghost? What's going on? So what we think is going on has to do with a sense of self or body image. Body image, not in the clinical sense that you think about body image, probably, Katie, in the sense of like anorexia and all that, but more sort of the body image of the neurological rooted sense of me being Baland, anchored in this physical body. That feeling is, of course, created in the brain. And
Gotcha.
if I lose an arm, for example, God forbid, in an accident, in some cases, you will feel the arm is still present. You'll have a phantom limb. That's because in your brain, there's a map of your entire body, in the regions of the superior parietal lobule, just using technical terms here, where there's like a sense of self or body image mapped on. It's sort of like on that area of the brain, right? And so we have that, and it allows us to feel anchored in the body. But that part of the brain or that body image, a sense of self, can be disrupted in certain instances. So if I take an electrical current and I zap that part of the brain, I disturb it, you might feel like the sense of self is now out there. I've created a ghost, so we can actually.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, I can make a ghost out of you, for example, by zapping that part of the brain, and you'll have like a ghost-like double. And so we know there is that, right? And so. How might that part of the brain, we think, so how might it get disturbed during sleep paralysis, lead it to have, for example, out-of-body experiences? So during sleep paralysis, I'm not sure if I mentioned this, but you can have a simple out-of-body experience where you see yourself floating out in space. So you see a copy of yourself.
Oh, so is it, sorry, I like my brain goes to, is it part dissociation? Like that's what I think of, like that removal from self and that like floating. I hear that from a lot of my patients when our system gets overwhelmed. Yeah. I always call it our brain pulling the ripcord. It's like, I'm out of here.
Yeah.
Do you think that's like connected in some way to that?
I think it's very connected. It's very connected. So what you're talking about, it's the clinical phenomenon of dissociation, which is very common during sleep paralysis as well. Just the feeling of being disassociated from the self, or feeling like you're watching yourself up from the outside. So we have tons of like patients or people with sleep paralysis saying, I saw myself from the outside looking at myself being eaten by a tiger, for example. So, so we have things like that, So what's going on? Obviously, the dissociation, as you will know very well, of course, is because it's a sense of allowing us to see things in a more objective way. We can't deal with the trauma or the traumatizing situation. So the brain is clever. It says, well, the hell with it. I'm just going to be a different person now. And so it will recruit some of these regions of the brain, allowing you to see yourself from the outside, right? So that's what we think is going on in dissociation. It uses some of these structures in the parietal lobes, I told you, where you become disembodied, right? So this is very interesting. Now, so during sleep paralysis, if you are lying there terrified and you feel like you're going to die, then in some cases your brain is going to allow you to become dissociated, right? So that can occur.
Of course.
But also, it's more than that, I think, and I've postulated with colleagues, is that, look, when you are lying there sleeping and you are unable to move or speak and you're starting to wake up, you will tell your body, you'll say, Baland, get out of here. There's something terrifying happening, right? So you send all these commands to move, but there's no feedback coming back.
But then you can't.
You can't, right?
Yeah.
There's no feedback coming back from your limbs, right? Normally, I don't want to become too technical, but it's actually not that technical, okay? So it's kind of simple.
Okay.
It's basically this. So when you're in a wakeful person, the way that movement and stuff happens is that I send commands to my body. I say, Baland, move. And then I have feedback coming back from my moving body, telling that region of the brain I told you about how to create a sense of Baland. It says, feedback is coming back. Your arm is out here, and it creates a sense of being anchored here and now in space. So that is created by the feedback coming back from the moving limbs, the moving arm and stuff, right? But during sleep paralysis, you're sending these commands to move, but there's no feedback coming back from your body. Nothing is there, right? And so based on that, we think that the brain is sort of perhaps engaging in autocompletion or autocorrection, sort of filling in the blanks for you, allowing you to hallucinate limbs, like I saw my limbs being floated up and down and all that stuff. And so we think that there's something going on with the body image being disturbed, leading you to have these out-of-body experiences, and then occasionally you might interpret that shadow-like being as a different person, not yourself, but a threatening figure.
Gotcha.
And then you project an agency and intentions into that, like you do in dreams, right? You project agency and intentions into like monsters and evil serial killers and all that stuff, right? So the same thing here. You say, oh my God, there's a shadow. You project evil intentions, agencies into that, and then your brain builds a scenario. Oh, I'm paralyzed. Something is holding me down. That's why I'm paralyzed. Oh, my breathing feels like something is pressuring my chest. Well, that's because during REM sleep, you have automatic breathing. And when you try to control that, it'll feel like something is
it fights back.
It fights back, exactly. And so you build a story around that. So that's what we think.
And that makes sense, because that's the great thing about our brain and our who we are is it's really adaptive, right? It tries to make sense of the nonsensical, which sometimes can be detrimental. Hence my job, in trying to like unlearn some of the things we've tried to make sense of, or say, this is why this took place. Yeah. But that does, especially in regards to sleep paralysis, because if we feel these sensations and we don't have any real explanation, then we're looking around in our environment to try to explain it. And everybody has shadows or dark parts in their room, or if not the whole room. Yep. So it's easy. I mean, as someone who, like, I'm sure everybody's this way at some points in time, but like if my husband's not home, I don't sleep as well. Yeah. And I swear to God, I can wake up and look in the corner and I could imagine somebody's getting in the window. You can do that to yourself. And and it's kind of like that version, but when you're already asleep. That's so interesting. Yeah,
and then when you sleep, definitely, because you're in a vulnerable position, right? Your predators could come at any point. So your brain's even more sort of, alert to these kinds of scenarios. So yeah, this is, your brain is a storyteller at the end of the day, and it loves to tell stories. It works with the narrative, as we see during dreams, right? So.
Well, narrative is everything. It's how we make sense of our world. Even as little kids, when they come back in from, let's say a child's been out playing with friends all day, they come in, they want to tell you the story, even if it's not fully put together, they're like, so I was out and then I played with, they want to tell you their whole day from beginning to end, or their whole experience, because in a way it's, at least from my understanding, it's like our brain processing what took place. And stories is how it does that.
It does. It does have these mechanisms to sort of anchor yourself in time and sort of put yourself in there and then build a narrative. And that's what we see. I think dreams illustrate that very well. Like we take ideas from our daily lives and we mix them in novel, unique, unrelated way. That's interesting. It's very unrelated and novel and unique. And then we build a story around that. So it's quite amazing, isn't it?
Yeah. Do you think, just out of curiosity, do you think there's any, people believe dreams tell us something. Do you think there's any truth in that there's any real value in our dreams?
It's a good question. So it's a very penetrating question, because it gets to the core of who I am as a person, right? There's the subjective Baland who views the world in a certain way. I have an experience, I interpret that. And then there's the objective scientist that looks at things from a scientific, objective point of view. So if you tell me the subjective person, if I take in all my own beliefs and, then yes, there could potentially be a deeper meaning and, significance to dreams. That's just my own beliefs about the world. That I'm open-minded in that. I don't want to say open-minded. But I'm open.
I know what you mean, though.
I'm open to things. I'm not a reductionist in that sense, right? So some scientists just believe in this, your senses and the empiricism and what you can sense in the world. I have a larger vision of that. So there is that layer. But the way I usually say, Katie, is that I look at things from multiple perspectives. So I say there's a psychological explanation, could be trauma, could be things that can contribute to your dreams and the stories you tell yourself in dreams. There could be another significant layer of your brain in doing certain things or having to work with certain stimuli. For example, we know that if you sleep in a cold room, you will feel like maybe you're on a Greenland, having wrestling with ice bears or something. That is no. Or if there's smoke in the room, you'll feel like you're in a house and it's on fire. So I think there's multiple mechanisms and layers, and then ultimately you could say, well, is there also a spiritual layer? This is where you go even further, right? And then that's where, as a scientist, can't comment much, but you know what I mean? That there's that layer that some people will say, oh, it could also mean this and that. And I do want to touch upon that, though, even though I'm not, it's not my expertise area, but there's people like genius in history, like geniuses like Ramanujan, the great Indian mathematician. Have you heard of him? It's like he's like this guy who came from India and just revolutionized math in a very short time at Cambridge. He was extreme genius, and he would say, "Look, all my ideas come from like God in a dream or something like that. It's all spiritual.
Wow.
So you have that.
Interesting.
So you have interesting things like that too. So as a scientist, we can always look back and find these things amusing. It's interesting to look at. And
it's a tricky thing and not that I don't even necessarily consider myself a scientist, but I'm part of the social sciences, right? So part of what I do is reading research and like parsing data and, looking at post hoc analysis of what's taken place. And then there's also the part of me that looks at people and their experiences. Yeah. And it's tricky. It's like a balance, right? Because I feel like if you get too much into one or the other, you miss things. So it's almost this balance of like, hey, this is the data. This is what we through research know to be true. Yeah. And then this is what people are experiencing. And there's always some overlap. Yeah. But it's almost like without both parts, you can't get the answer to anything. It's like, so dreams could, from what you know in the research you've done, we kind of know where they're coming from. And I've always been of that mind where it's like bits of our day and our life that we just try to put into a story to make sense of it. And it's kind of processing things. Yeah. For lack of a better term. But then people, like just the other day, I got a message from a viewer that was like, I had this dream that you were pregnant. And I always think of pregnancy as like, you're going to birth something new, not like a child, but like pregnant with an idea, pregnant with a change, growth, things like that. And I'm like, does it really mean that? I don't know,
one can speculate, of course. I think if you told somebody 100 years ago that look, on your skin right now, you have all these animals crawling, right? There's billions, trillions of them. They'll say, God, kill this, hang this guy. And now they invented the microscope and you look, my God, vast majority of your cells are bacterial cells, like all over, So what I'm saying is maybe there's a microscope or something we have to invent in 500 years in order for us to understand different realms and dimensions. But as a scientist, I can only speculate and sort of find these things interesting, but I will, of course, I have to rely on, pure, rigorous science for now. But I remain open-minded. That's the thing in my own life. I say, look, there is a subjective vantage point to the world that is very hard to sort of, put words on. Like, how do you explain to a Martian what the redness of red is, right? He can only say, you can measure like wavelengths, get into the eye, your brain is active and you process this, but how do you explain what red is or what love is or something like that, right? And so there is some subjective nature to our experience that it's very hard to just describe in a third person perspective, if that makes sense.
No, it totally makes sense. It's almost like, I don't know if this even is the right word, but it's like intangible. Like you can feel it, obviously. It's like tangible in your life, but it's like, how do you explain something that you experience to someone else? It's going to be so different person to person, right? My experience of love is going to be different from your experience of love, or how I would describe the color purple is going to be different from how you might describe it, because we each have our own subjective experience. Yeah. It's so interesting. I can see why this is such a fascinating field, because I don't know, it's like getting into, first of all, the brain is extremely fascinating to me, but also what it does when we're not active is interesting. And I mentioned earlier, and I don't know if you have any thoughts about this, but a lot of my patients have found relief from trauma symptoms. So if we're talking about maybe sleep paralysis or different sleep issues coming out of trauma or this mode of hypervigilance, people found EMDR, or eye movement desensitization reprocessing, which is like, for anybody who doesn't know, it's like, when you follow a finger, a light, or you can like even tap, sides of your body. It's like bilateral stimulation, they call it. So tapping left, then right, back and forth. And from what I've read, again, I'm not trained in it. I don't offer it in my practice, but I know that they have told, or what it's speculated is that it mimics Rem sleep and like what our eyes do, and that gives our brain another chance to process the trauma. Do you have any thoughts about it? Yeah,
it's a great question. It's a complicated one, but it's a very interesting question because so that lady Shapiro or whatever her name was, she was actually walking over in San Francisco and discovered this method from just walking and thinking about negative stuff, and then she realized when I'm walking, it's almost like the same as my eyes moving back and forth. She drew some kind of conclusion from that, and then she would find that would make trauma less. And now it seems like there's research pointing to the fact that it does seems to reduce amygdala activation. So there's a lot of strength to that whole thing now. Meaning, like I remember, like 5 or 6 years ago, I was having conversation with colleagues over in Boston, and they would say, oh, maybe more than that, but they would say, oh, this is nonsense. What EMDR, like moving your eyes, makes no sense. But then later on, we would just laugh at ourselves saying, wow, it turns out it actually seems to be working. Like when you move your eyes, something is happening and you can process your traumas like that. And so to be honest, like I actually sometimes when I'm stressed, I will move my eyes back and forth and I will feel better. So it seems like it is, not from my own subjective thing, but it does seem to reduce the activation of these fear centers of the brain, these anxiety centers of the brain. So there's something very powerful to it. I'm very optimistic about it, and it could be potentially. I've heard actually one thing that it mimics the fact that when we are walking, we are facing threat, right? So if you're walking, you are facing, so if there's something threatening your life, normally if you are in a threatening situation, you run away, right? You flee. But if you face it, that is almost going towards it, causing your amygdala to be less active. And when you are moving your eyes, you're mimicking the visual scope that would be similar to you actually walking in a straight path towards something. So I've heard that being explained, as one explanation for that. But yeah, it's certainly very interesting. I think it could be useful.
Yeah, I mean, I've heard great things from many patients and many viewers over the years, and it's obviously it's like anecdotal. I don't know what the end of my study would be. Let's say like 100 or 200. So it's not a huge swath of people, but the more I read about it and the more and I'm like you, like I'll try it out on myself. And even my good friend and colleague, Dr. Alexa Altman, who practices it, I did a video with me and I did the tapping while she talked me through stressful times in my life. And I found it really interesting because it was calming. And, it's sometimes things with the brain, you're like, I don't really know what's happening, but if it's positive, if it helps someone and it's not hurting anything, it's like, don't knock it, but it's just interesting.
It's very interesting, but I definitely the research points to the fact that it's just not simply a placebo. The placebo is great. We love the placebo. It works in about 50% of cases, very powerful. But this is actually doing something to your brain that will shift you into that parasympathetic, relaxed kind of state of being. And it's doing something with the amygdala and those circuits by moving your eyes. And is it mimicking REM? I'm not sure. I haven't looked at that link very well, but we do certainly know that REM sleep is extremely important for processing emotions. I mean, if you look at people with depression, the first thing you will see is that their REM sleep is shifted. So REM sleep will become more it will sort of intrude on deep sleep. So it turns out, that their deep sleep during the first, so we mentioned that these stages of sleep occur. So during the first 90-minute cycle, your deep sleep will be totally reduced and REM will take over. It will say, I need to process these emotions. Something bad is going on right now. So you will have less deep sleep and much more REM just to process all those emotions that are going awry in your life. But of course, it comes at a price. Then you don't have deep sleep that would allow you to...
which is like when you clean your brain out, essentially.
When you clean your brain out and you can prevent things like Alzheimer's and all that. So, but your brain says, look, this is serious. There's something going on. Why is this person releasing all this cortisol during the day? Why is the amygdala so active? Let's do something about it. And let's just put this person in this state where they will have dense, strong, and a REM sleep just taking over the whole thing and allowing you to process the emotions. But, that's why you want to deal with depression really early and prevent it from, causing too much, damage.
Yeah, that's interesting. I didn't know. I know like I'm working on a video even right now about depression in the brain, and because there's brain scans showing the differences of what areas are lit up and what areas like aren't as active, essentially active and inactive. And how it can even, it changes our brain a little bit. I didn't know it. I mean, it makes sense that if REM is the emotion, is like processing emotion, that if you're having a hard time, you're going to have more of that. So do you think that then people who, let's say, have repeated traumas in their life, that I know, and this, not to get too in the weeds, but are you familiar with the ACEs study, the Adverse Childhood Experiences study?
Adverse childhood. I'm not, if you mention it, maybe I will have heard about it. What?
Okay. It's definitely more like in my realm of things. Like, I don't know why, you would have read about it or heard about it, but essentially it was an old study, I think in like 1996. I might be off by a couple of years. They, it was Kaiser Permanente, and I don't know if it was the CDC, but it was some big organization. They did this huge study, thousands of people, and they had them fill out these ACEs questions. It's an ACEs questionnaire. And it's all about adverse childhood experiences. And so there are things from like, did you ever fear for your life before you were 18? Did someone in your family or in your life threaten your safety? Did anybody you knew, like a parent or a close family member, go to jail? And so essentially it's going through little by little different adverse traumas, really. We could call them adverse childhood experiences, or we can just call them traumas. And the higher the ACEs, meaning the more traumas we've had, then the more predisposed we are to other medical complications, things like Alzheimer's, things like high blood pressure, things like diabetes and heart disease, and there was this whole list of things, and it just like sparked. I'm like, when things come together, where I'm like, oh my God, okay, well, if deep sleep is limited, because I know how important that is for other, for the cleaning of the brain, and for us to be able to go on and have healthy, whether it is Alzheimer's or even just be able to think clearly.
Just have energy, even like, you see the past people that tell you, I have no energy, I can't do anything, I feel like and there's a biological reason. I mean, you're not getting deep sleep, as you should. So, but I don't want to.
And like concentration difficulties, symptom of depression, 100%. Makes total sense.
Well, the hippocampus is about reduced by. So the hippocampus, for your viewers, is the part of the brain. The memory part of the brain, right? It will be reduced by 20% in the people with depression. So there's a 20% reduction that's been shown over in the UK, right? So you have that. You have the cortical region, meaning that part of the brain that has to do with sort of impulse control, controlling your sort of instincts and your just ability to like control yourself from overeating and all that. That part would become thinner from depression. And
interesting.
So you're having all of these things occur. So you have a sluggish brain control center. You can't focus, you can't remember things, and then you have all that, and it makes total sense with that study, and it fits lots of other research as well. It's like really showing that if you lose a parent early, then you are much more likely to develop depression, and it's this helplessness kind of if you haven't if you have a life where you are a child and the worst thing happened in the world, like losing a parent or a big trauma, right? Then you say, oh my God, this doesn't make sense. Whatever I do, I can't change circumstances. And so you just kind of say, well, this is out of control. And you continue to have these these symptoms throughout life and, leading to, but definitely very interesting. And then, but all the biological sort of markers you mentioned with diabetes and all that stuff, high blood pressure, definitely could be also sleep mediated, meaning sleep is, if you're disturbing sleep, then you will have, worse blood pressure, you'll have worse diabetes. It all feeds on each other and so.
I know, that's what's so fascinating. I think that's why I find sleep and just the brain, because I know for a long time, mental illness and mental health issues as a whole have been stigmatized because, quote unquote, you can't see it. It's not like a broken arm where I'm like, hey, Baland, look, I broke my forearm and you can see it's broken. This is like, hey, I don't feel like myself. I'm, more lethargic. I can't concentrate. My sleep is disrupted. My appetite is off. You're like, okay, sure. I believe you, I guess, but that not being able to see it now has become untrue because we actually can see it. Because if you get scans of the brain, you can see, like you're talking about, like a 20% reduction in the hippocampus, which I know is memory, we know it's a memory formation area. So that's why you can't recall things like you used to. Or even when the amygdala like is overactive, it gets enlarged. We can actually see it become enlarged. Yeah. So then it would be triggered more easily. And then like other parts are thinned, parts of like impulse control, things like that. So it's so fascinating to me. So much. I'm like, there's so many places we could take this. But I guess my kind of where I want to end is offering some ways that people can better manage their sleep. Like a good question, I guess, would be how much sleep should people, I know it's going to vary person to person, but how much sleep should we strive to get every night?
So the typical would be a sort of 7 to 9 would be good. So having 7 to 9.
I'm a 9.
You're 9. Okay, that's good.
I always need 9.
No, it's good. It's good. Get your sleep, and as long as you feel refreshed, that's totally good. Get your sleep. It's very important. But I think more than that, as there've been studies done showing that if you get sleep that's consistent, like each night you get good consistent sleep. So getting 6 every night, and it's just like fits the way you work, then your brain will be very efficient and you'll get very good high quality sleep versus getting 6, 7, 8, 3, 2, 8. You know what I mean? Like, so getting like a consistent little is better than getting like the ups and down. But 7 to 9 is what the sort of sleep specialist per se will tell you is really the sweet spot of like getting good sleep. But more than that, I would say sleeping at a time that fits your sort of your temperament or sort of your genes. There seems to be a genetic factor for when you want to sleep, right? So for me, I like to sleep early and wake early. That's kind of my chronotype, so to speak, right? My genetic disposition. So I sleep early, wake up early, and I feel refreshed and I feel good. So other people might have a bit of more tilted towards sleeping at 12, 1, wake up, but make it consistent. That's the point, and find the right timing and don't change that up too much as well.
Why does the consistency, it takes longer to get into deep sleep or REM sleep? Is that what they're finding? It's
a good point. The whole thing is that you have a regulator in your brain, a clock that regulates your sleep and regulates how much melatonin is released. So melatonin is this chemical that tells you when to sort of initiate sleep and initiate sleepiness. And then you have another chemical called adenosine, which builds up and allows you to feel really sleepy. So that's when you builds up and you get more and more drowsy and you want to sleep. That's adenosine. That's
like when you're fighting it, you're like, I gotta go to bed.
Yeah, exactly. So these chemicals are being regulated, especially melatonin, is by this internal clock in the brain. And so you don't want to mix that clock up too much, because then your brain's is this day, is it night, what's going on? And this clock is directly affected actually by light. So by the light, photons hitting your retina and activating your brain, that's gonna mess up this light. There's pathways going from there to retina and all that to changing that clock, that internal clock. Which would probably explain why we shouldn't be on our phones. Exactly. And it's a very important thing, right? To make sure you don't get that light, or if you go to the bathroom middle of the night, don't have this huge light, of the bathroom, it's going to mess up your sleep wake cycle, that internal regulator of sleep, allowing you to get good restful sleep, like early or whatever fits you. So regularity, and also like being aware of light, things like light. And so those are the key things. Some people would say don't get too sort of aroused at night, psychologically too stressed or anxious, because then that will also inhibit some of the the circuits in your brain that would allow you to get good sleep and restful sleep. And so all of these factors do play in.
Yeah, it's interesting because a couple things came to mind. First of all, like I definitely am more of an anxious person.
Yeah.
I'm very type A. It's something I battle with. I think it's made me successful, but it's also detrimental in some ways. And if I find myself overly agitated mentally before bed, I'll do like a shake.
Okay.
And it's almost like, it sounds silly, but it's like it releases, that built up energy or that built up agitation.
Interesting. I never heard that before. You actually do some movement and it kind of is cathartic in a way. It makes you more relaxed.
Yeah, it's like you know how my hypothesis is that it's because my amygdala is like queuing me up because it senses some like psychological threat that's probably not there because it's anxiety driven.
Yeah.
But it's readying me for like fight or flight. And so I'm moving in a way of like fight or flight, right? There's movement associated with it.
Yeah.
And if I initiate that movement, it's almost like I'm giving that action a release.
That's very interesting. No, it's the fact that it works makes it interesting. One should look into it.
Give it a try. Let me know.
You're kind of moving and it works. That's very interesting. For me, I think what can help is taking a walk. So if too many emails coming in or something, and I'm like, it's late and I'm kind of feeling a bit too sort of stressed, then I'll just go for a little walk, and that can do it for me. That can sort of help me can calm down as well. That
might be the amount of movement you need. Do you know what I mean? It's still movement, I think, and it can kind of get that out. Yeah. Interesting. But then the light thing is fascinating to me for affecting our sleep, because if I do wake up to go pee in the middle of the night, I like barely open my eyes, which I know sounds dangerous, but you know your space well enough. So it's like I kind of feel my way in. I don't turn on any lights because I find it so disruptive. I never even thought about it. I just thought about it in the fact that like I want to go back to sleep, and because I want to go back to sleep, I just need to not be bothered by any light. So that's really interesting, because I've always just done that naturally, even as a kid and stuff. So
that's a
good things to know.
Yeah, no, that's good. Absolutely.
Yeah. Are there any other tips and tools and things that people can do? Or, I mean, obviously my brain goes to like, I think if you find yourself having sleep paralysis a lot, or sleep disturbances as a whole, or what you call them, parasomnias, right? Parasomnias. That getting into therapy, talking about what's bothering you is probably going to be beneficial. Are there any other things they know of?
That's 100% very good. Yeah. So anything that can make you more relaxed and sort of dampen down these anxiety and fear centers in the brain, definitely that could be helpful for any of the parasomnia, sleep paralysis, things like meditation, exercising, all these kind of things. For sleep paralysis per se, if it's really sort of, disturbing, you have a lot of sleep paralysis, I did develop a therapy, and we did test that in some studies showing very interesting results. Yeah, so we did a study, University of Bologna, collaborating with them, and we found that in patients with narcolepsy, which is this for your viewers, it's a sleep disorder where you will fall asleep while maybe taking a walk or giving a lecture. I usually say if you fall asleep during one of my colleagues' lecture, then that wouldn't be a surprise. But if I fell asleep during my own lecture, I would have narcolepsy, right? So as you fall asleep suddenly. So these guys will also have sleep paralysis often. So we did a study, and we found that using these techniques I developed, we found about a 50% plus reduction in sleep paralysis after 8 weeks. But this was a small pilot study, so I don't want to get you're too excited, Katie.
But it's still exciting.
It was exciting. It was still a little pilot study, and with a control condition, and published in a good journal, a decent journal. So it was good. It's a good first step. And it's basically 4 steps you apply directly during sleep paralysis, meaning that when sleep paralysis occurs, you sort of the first thing you do something we called cognitive reappraisal first? Yes. So you tell yourself, this is not too terrifying. Close your eyes. Don't get too scared. This is normal. People have this all around the world. So you cognitively, mentally sort of say, okay, this is fine. And you take out the sort of the punch, of the experience, you take it out. And then you do emotional and psychological distancing, which I'm sure you know all about. It's kind of emotionally say, okay, given it's not terrifying, I'm not going to feel scared. It's not going to help for me to be worry and all that. So you do these mental and emotional tricks, and then you get to the main meal, which is you focus all your attention intensely on something positive, sort of to hijack all your attention and put it on like it could be something comforting, like your mother's face, or your in your case your husband's face, or maybe for some people it's a prayer. Whatever feels really good for them, you do that, and then that way you prevent your attentional systems to like going to all these kind of dangerous thoughts of like ghosts, and then causing you to potentially have these visions. And then finally, the fourth step is relax. Don't try to move, because when you try to move, you might create some of these loops.
Those feelings, like
these feelings. Right? So don't do that. Have a non-judgmental attitudes to it, and just let it fly by. And lo and behold, these kind of psychological tricks here that are for neuroscientists a bit a little bit on the softer side, it seems to work. And then now we are doing more research on that over in Boston. See if how that could work even more people. So. Yeah.
No, that's fascinating. And those are all tools and techniques and things that, like, as a therapist, I would support. We know that it works in other ways, so I don't see why it wouldn't work in those scenarios in particular. Yeah. And just the final question I actually have is, does taking melatonin or L-theanine or magnesium or any of these like over-the-counter types of supplements, do we find those to actually be beneficial, or is that something people should stay away from? Are we messing with our own balance?
That's a good point. Yeah, with melatonin, of course, could potentially be messing with some hormones and things like that. So want to be maybe careful. Of course, I'm not a physician.
Of course, I'm not either. This is just us sharing in what we do know.
Yeah. I would say magnesium I do take. I think it's it's a very good thing to take, and it can help you relax probably. And but I just take it because it's really healthy. It's just good to take, right? But it does have a relaxing effect in that way as well. So magnesium, definitely. Melatonin, I would probably more careful with, and then L-theanine you mentioned. Again, I don't know much about that. It's a precursor to, what is a precursor to? I can't remember, but is it converted into serotonin or something? It's
converted into serotonin, I believe. I'd have to look it up too, real quick.
I think it's L-theanine, tryptophan, serotonin, but you can just have a look.
It's amino acid found primarily in some teas and mushrooms. Yeah. I believe it's serotonin. I'd have to really dig into this old article.
It doesn't matter, but I've heard definitely people would use it for sleep. I don't know much about it, but my thought is, if I had heard it was like a really good thing, I probably could tell you it's really good. I haven't heard that it's really good, but but definitely melatonin. I would maybe consult them.
Like stay away from. Yeah, consult your doctor. Yeah, be careful with.
Yeah, it's not. I don't think it's necessarily the safest, but.
Okay, that's good to know. I mean, if I'm being honest, my patients who have taken it, sometimes because their doctors told them, other times because it's over the counter and they've heard it helps with sleep. Yeah. I have yet to have someone say, oh, it's super effective and helpful. Yeah. It's more like it worked for a little bit and now it doesn't.
I think that's Katie, I think what it does is it potentially maybe could help with like sleep-wake cycles being disrupted. So if you are sleeping, if you are traveling and you are like going from Europe to the US, something like that, and you want to sort of balance your sleep-wake cycle, then yes, maybe it could be helpful for a short time. But I think definitely if you take it like for long, I don't think it's that helpful. And also, it's not like melatonin is not meant to particularly give you more deep sleep or REM sleep. It's kind of more the timing of sleep that it really helps with. And maybe for travelers, if you have experience and you've consulted a doctor, like zones to other time zones, then so.
And sorry, I could talk to you for hours. I'll be really brief.
Yeah, it's interesting.
But that makes my mind go to, if we take something like a sleep aid, like that's a prescribed, like Ambien, for example, do we believe that we still get deep sleep and REM sleep? Or I would assume that, I don't know. I would wonder if it would disrupt that and it actually wouldn't be effective sleep.
Yeah, that's the thing. Things like alcohol, things like any of these tranquilizers, anything like, they don't give you good sleep. So sleep has a very particular architecture, right? With the stages 1, 2, and 3, and 4. And then there's also a certain activation of your brain if you like eavesdrop using EEG, like these looking at signals of the brain. It's very unique, right? Each stage has its own pattern. So deep sleep will have these patterns and REM sleep will have a certain pattern. And that very particular architecture is not improved or normalized, let's say, by any of these. Even serotonin, like SSRIs, as you know, they don't actually rectify that architecture, which is disrupted in people with insomnia or depression. So it doesn't help. And that's the thing. It doesn't help you get good quality sleep. For that, unfortunately, there is, I'm not aware, there is no like cure for that per se. Scientists are working.
Interesting. It's almost like in order to get better sleep, and I know everybody's going to hate this answer, but it sounds like we have to work on ourselves and process, traumas, better manage our anxiety through other means. Because if we try to chemically, whether that's through medication or over-the-counter supplements or anything, we're actually only going to disrupt it or at least not improve it. So the only way to really do it is to like do the things you're talking about, and meditation, exercise, having a regular sleep time, like sleep and wake cycles, keeping those consistent. I find routines around bedtime to be kind of beneficial too, kind of like getting my body ready for sleep. Then it's like it's prepared for it. It knows it's coming. And then I spend less time laying in bed, rolling around.
That's a very good point. All that is good, very, very good. So exactly, these drugs will not help with the architecture of sleep, and then the routine business is very important. Your brain sort of get cued to when to sleep, and there's actually work done showing that if you sleep in a hotel the first night or 2 or 3, you'll get very good sleep often. I mean, aside from the sleep, paralysis we talked about, sleep paralysis and all that, but generally, like, meaning if you have insomnia and you've sort of, your brain has linked not being able to sleep with a certain bed in a certain room and stuff like that. When you go to sleep, you just will have potentially bad sleep. And if you go to a novel environment, ideally a safe environment, then you can sometimes get suddenly see good sleep like that. So yes, you're having routines that remind your brain, now it's time to sleep. Relax these centers of the brain. Dampen these chemicals, turn down the anxiety part of the brain. Definitely.
That's interesting. I could see like us attaching that, right? This bed means I'm not going to sleep, or this area that I'm in is always going to, wake me up. Is there? And I promise this is the last question. Is there a reason, because I've heard from my audience and I know myself as well, is there a reason we tend to wake up sometimes at the same time? Like I always wake up to go pee in the middle of the night, like 4 hours into my sleep. Is there a reason for that pattern?
Yeah, so there's definitely something to do with from some kind of conditioning where people will wake up a certain time. It's almost like the brain learns that there's some kind of learning going on in the brain where it learns, okay, now it's time to get up, and it sort of regulates like, oh, this is maybe the second cycle of sleep cycle I've went through. Let me wake this person up at this time. So it becomes like a habit. By habit, I mean the brain-based habit, a circuit-based habit, where your brain learns that. So definitely, and I've had that. I've had in periods where there's been like where I've woken up like 4 o'clock each night, and it just keeps like the same thing. What's going on? I'm waking up, and then you learn. Then you'll teach your brain not to do that. It could be by I don't know, whatever you're doing, changing your habits during the day, and then you find, okay, I'm not waking up at that time. But definitely there is a brain-based reason why you will have these certain pattern occur and causing you, as you say, to wake up at certain times. Your brain is really interesting with these like clocks and timing. Very powerful, that it can know that now it's time,
without looking at a clock, it knows that it's time.
It's very, very, it's quite fascinating how it can do that, definitely.
Yeah, this is so interesting. Thank you for taking the time to speak with us. Like I said, I could talk to you for hours. I find sleep in the brain. This is all incredibly fascinating. If people want to learn more about you or read a book of yours or a podcast, where can they find you? How can they get more of you? So I'm on Instagram, Baland Jalal. I have a YouTube channel, although I don't really post that often. I wish I could do more. I'd love to. It's a lot of work. It's a lot of work, isn't it? Baland Jalal as well. I do have a book as a clinical manual, so maybe that's more sort of for you, Katie, not for your audience. But I have a lot of clinicians that listen as well, so if we have other clinicians out there. Yeah, I do have a book, so they can look it up. It's called Transdiagnostic Treatment Manual, and it's particularly targeting Muslim cultural groups, so people with that sort of refugees and things like that. We developed with a colleague over in Boston. So if you have colleagues working with refugees, maybe that they can pick it up. I'm making a plug for my book here. Feels awkward, but that's fine. So that is those are the places, and then I enjoyed talking to you. It's very fascinating. I feel like we could also talk for a long time. It's fun. Yeah, there's so much we could get into. So thank you so much for taking the time. Though I know you're spending time with your family, so I don't want to take any more of it. But this has just been so incredibly interesting, and we'd love to have you back. Thank you. My pleasure. I'd love to. Okay, take care of yourself. Thank you. Ask her about your self-esteem or why your feelings hurt. You can ask her why breakups suck or why you've hit a plateau. Inquire all those questions you've always